My name is Madison Clarke. I'm 28, and last Tuesday, at what was supposed to be a simple family dinner, my parents called me useless for the last time. What they didn't know was that I'd been secretly documenting their financial fraud for months, and the FBI raid on their house 3 days later would destroy everything they'd built on lies. The smug looks on their faces when they compared me to my successful brother Tyler vanished the moment I calmly said, "I wonder what the IRS would think about your offshore accounts." But this story isn't just about one dinner, it's about 15 years of psychological abuse, stolen inheritance, and a family empire built on deception that I single-handedly brought crashing down. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama that literally changed my entire life, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story that has more twists than a pretzel factory and a revenge plot that would make Shakespeare proud, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, you're going to want to follow along for this entire emotional roller coaster. This isn't just about family drama, this is about justice karma and what happens when the quiet kid finally decides to fight back. Let's get into it. Growing up in the Clarke household meant living in the shadow of golden boy Tyler, who was 2 years older and apparently incapable of doing wrong in our parents' eyes. While he was captain of the football team, dating the homecoming queen, and coasting through high school with C's that my parents celebrated like Nobel Prizes, I was pulling all-nighters to maintain my 4 gigapascals volunteering at animal shelters and working part-time jobs to save for college. The disparity in treatment wasn't subtle, it was a neon sign flashing disappointment every time I walked into a room. My mother, Patricia, was a former beauty queen who married my father, Robert, for his family's construction business. She spent her days at country club lunches and her evenings critiquing everything about me, from my mousy brown hair to my choice to study accounting instead of something more feminine like teaching or nursing. Dad was worse in his own way. He'd ignore my achievements completely while throwing elaborate parties for Tyler's mediocre accomplishments. When I graduated valedictorian, they took the family out to Applebee's. When Tyler barely passed his driving test on the 3rd try, Dad bought him a brand new Mustang. The real kicker came when my grandmother, my dad's mother, who actually loved me unconditionally, passed away during my junior year of college. She'd always promised that her house, a beautiful Victorian, worth about $400,000, would be mine, because I was the one who visited her every week, helped with her medications, and actually cared about her stories. I held her hand when she died, and her last words to me were, "The house is yours, sweetheart." I made sure of it. Except when the will was read, suddenly the house was going to Tyler. My parents claimed Grandma had changed her mind in her final months, that she thought Tyler needed it more since he was starting a family soon with his girlfriend of 3 months. I knew it was impossible. Grandma had dementia toward the end, yes, but she was lucid about property matters and she'd shown me the will multiple times. But I was 20 grieving and had no money for lawyers to contest it. Tyler sold the house within 6 months to fund his entrepreneurship phase, which consisted mainly of failed attempts at dropshipping and cryptocurrency day trading. College became my escape and my weapon. While studying forensic accounting, I learned exactly how money moves, how people hide assets, and how financial crimes leave digital footprints that are nearly impossible to erase. I graduated summa cum laude and immediately got hired by a prestigious firm that specialized in white-collar crime investigation. My parents attended my graduation but spent the entire ceremony talking about Tyler's latest business venture, a food truck that lasted exactly 3 weeks before he abandoned it. For the next 6 years, I built my career methodically. I became one of the youngest senior associates at my firm, specializing in cases involving family businesses, tax evasion, and inheritance fraud. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was helping other families recover stolen assets, while my own family continued to gaslight me about Grandma's house. Every successful case felt like practice for something bigger, something more personal. The breaking point started about 8 months ago when I received a call from Tyler, drunk and rambling about how the family business was struggling and how Dad was moving money around to keep things afloat. In his intoxicated state, he mentioned offshore accounts, shell companies, and payments to workers under the table to avoid taxes. Most people would have hung up, but I stayed on the line, quietly recording everything while my brother unknowingly handed me the keys to bringing down the empire that had been built on my exclusion. That night, I started what would become the most thorough investigation of my career. Every Sunday dinner became reconnaissance. Every family gathering became an opportunity to gather evidence. I smiled and nodded while they belittled my boring job, all while mentally cataloging their expensive vacations, new cars, and home renovations that didn't match their claimed income. The beautiful part was that they were so confident in their superiority, so certain that I was too weak and unsuccessful to be a threat, that they talked freely about their business in front of me like I was furniture. Armed with my professional expertise and a burning desire for justice, I began systematically documenting every suspicious financial activity I could observe. It started small, photographing tax documents left carelessly on Dad's home office desk during family gatherings, noting the VIN numbers of their luxury cars to cross-reference with their declared income, and casually asking about their vacations to create a timeline of expenditures that far exceeded what their legitimate business should have generated. The Clarke Construction Company, which my father had inherited from my grandfather and built into a regional powerhouse, appeared successful on the surface. They had contracts with the city, built custom homes for wealthy clients, and maintained a fleet of expensive equipment. But as I dug deeper, patterns emerged that made my forensic accounting training light up like a Christmas tree. The company was paying workers in cash to avoid payroll taxes, inflating material costs on government contracts, and most damning of all, routing profits through a complex network of shell companies that ultimately led to accounts in the Cayman Islands. My breakthrough came during Easter dinner, when Dad's business partner, Uncle Frank, not actually related, just an old family friend, had too much wine and started complaining about the accountant asking too many questions about the Bermuda thing. I played dumb, but internally I was celebrating Bermuda is a notorious tax haven and any legitimate business owner wouldn't refer to legal international accounts so secretively. That night, I started cross-referencing public business filings, and sure enough, Clarke Construction had 3 subsidiary companies registered in Bermuda that weren't mentioned anywhere in their local tax filings. The psychological abuse intensified as my investigation progressed, almost like they could sense I was becoming a threat even though they didn't know what I was doing. Mom started making increasingly cruel comments about my failure to find a husband and how my career was meaningless compared to Tyler's real-world experience. Dad began openly comparing me to Tyler in front of extended family, talking about how proud he was of his son's business acumen while dismissing my forensic accounting work as just paperwork. The most painful moment came during my 28th birthday party, if you could call it that. While Tyler got surprise parties with dozens of friends, professional catering, and expensive gifts, my birthday was acknowledged with a grocery store cake and dinner at a chain restaurant where Mom spent the entire time critiquing my outfit. And Dad took work calls. When I tried to share that I'd been promoted to senior investigator and was now leading major fraud cases, Dad literally laughed and said, "That's nice, honey, but when are you going to do something that actually matters?" Tyler, who was unemployed at the time and living in their basement, nodded along like he was some kind of success guru. But every insult, every dismissal, every moment of being treated like I didn't matter only fueled my determination. I started working evenings and weekends on my personal investigation, treating it like the most important case of my career. I discovered that over the past 15 years, my parents had hidden approximately $2.3 million in taxable income through their various schemes. They'd avoided paying an estimated $680, 0 inches federal and state taxes, while collecting government contracts that they won partially by underbidding competitors who were actually paying their workers legally. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing regular transfers to offshore accounts, contracts with suspicious cost overruns, payroll records that didn't match the number of workers on job sites, and most incredibly, email communications where they explicitly discussed these illegal activities. My father had saved emails going back 10 years because he was technologically incompetent and never cleaned out his inbox. It was a forensic accountant's dream and a criminal's nightmare. As I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, I realized I had enough evidence to not only expose their tax fraud, but also to potentially recover the money that should have been mine from Grandma's inheritance. The timing of her will change coincided perfectly with a period when the business was struggling and they needed liquid assets. I strongly suspected they had manipulated a confused elderly woman into changing her will to provide them with cash flow, which constituted elder abuse and inheritance fraud. The most satisfying part was that they had no idea what was coming. They continued treating me like I was the family failure, while I was systematically building the case that would destroy everything they'd worked for. Every Sunday dinner became a performance where I played the role of the disappointing daughter while secretly being their judge, jury, and executioner. The irony was delicious, they thought. My boring accounting job made me insignificant, never realizing that I was one of the most skilled financial investigators in the state. Last Tuesday started like any other family dinner invitation. Mom's passive-aggressive text about how it would be nice if Madison could join us for once, despite the fact that I attended every single monthly dinner, religiously. I arrived at their pristine suburban McMansion paid for with tax-free money, as I now knew, with my usual facade of polite compliance. But this time I was carrying a small recording device and the completed 47-page investigation report in my car. Tyler was already there with his new girlfriend, Stephanie, a two-year-old Instagram influencer who giggled at everything he said and called him baby every other sentence. Mom had prepared her usual elaborate spread. She was an excellent cook, I'll give her that, but the atmosphere was tense from the moment I walked in. Dad was on edge about something work-related, snapping at Mom about trivial things and drinking bourbon before 5 p.m., which was unusual even for him. The conversation started normally enough, Mom asking invasive questions about my non-existent love life, Dad pontificating about the challenges of running a real business, and Tyler bragging about his latest get-rich-quick scheme, involving NFTs or cryptocurrency or some other buzzword he'd learned on TikTok. Stephanie contributed by taking selfies with her food and asking if the Wi-Fi password was still the same because she needed to post her dinner aesthetic. But then Mom made the comment that would change everything. We were discussing my recent promotion, and instead of congratulating me, she sighed dramatically and said, "Madison, don't you think it's time to consider a career change? Accounting is so limiting. Look at Tyler, he's an entrepreneur, he thinks outside the box. You just push papers around all day." Dad jumped in with, "Your mother's right. Tyler's building something real. You're just, well." He paused for effect, looked directly at me, and delivered the words that would seal their fate. "How does it feel being useless? When are you going to do something that actually contributes to society?" The table went silent. Tyler smirked. Stephanie looked confused but sensed drama and stopped taking pictures. Mom nodded approvingly, like Dad had made some profound point. They all stared at me, waiting for my usual response of hurt, silence, or defensive explanations about the importance of my work. They were expecting me to shrink, to apologize for disappointing them, to promise to do better. Instead, I sat down, my fork looked calmly around the table, and said, "Speaking of contributing to society, I wonder what the IRS would think about your offshore accounts in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands." Or maybe the FBI would be interested in how you've been inflating government contract costs for the past decade. Actually, Dad, how does it feel knowing you've stolen almost $750,000 from taxpayers who actually work for their money? You could have heard a pin drop. Dad's face went through several color changes: red, white, then a concerning shade of purple. Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Tyler stopped smirking immediately and started looking between his parents with growing panic. Stephanie, bless her heart, was still completely lost but smart enough to stop filming her Instagram story. "What did you just say?" Dad's voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of tone that used to terrify me as a child. But I was 28 years old, armed with irrefutable evidence, and absolutely done being afraid of these people. I said I've spent the last 8 months investigating Clarke Construction's finances, and I have documented proof of systematic tax evasion, government contract fraud, and money laundering. I also have evidence suggesting that you manipulated Grandma into changing her will while she was suffering from dementia, which constitutes elder abuse. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of their Cayman Islands bank statement that I'd photographed during last Christmas's dinner. This account alone contains $847,000 that was never declared to the IRS. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. Dad started screaming about invasion of privacy, demanding to know how I got confidential information, threatening to sue me, and calling me every name in the book. Mom was crying and asking how I could betray family like this and demanding to know if I'd lost my mind. Tyler was surprisingly quiet, but I could see him calculating whether he'd implicated himself in any crimes during our previous conversations. But here's what happened next that still makes me smile. I didn't argue with them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain my actions or justify my investigation. Instead, I stood up calmly, picked up my purse, and said, "The FBI will be in touch." Oh, and Tyler, that drunk call you made 8 months ago when you told me about the money moving around, I recorded it. Sweet dreams. The silence that followed was absolutely golden. I walked out of that house for what I knew would be the last time, got in my car, and drove straight to the FBI field office, where I'd already scheduled an appointment. Special Agent Rodriguez was waiting for me with a full investigative team, and I handed over 8 months of meticulous documentation that would make their case airtight. But wait, because this story gets so much better from here. That dinner was just the beginning of what would become the most satisfying week of my entire life. If you're wondering what happened next, if the FBI actually took action, and how this family of fraudsters got exactly what they deserved, you absolutely need to stick around. The karma that followed was so perfect, so beautifully orchestrated by the universe, that it almost felt too good to be true. Make sure you're subscribed, because the revenge that unfolded over the next few days was legendary. Within 48 hours of my visit to the FBI field office, Special Agent Rodriguez called to inform me that they were moving forward with a full investigation. My 8 months of documentation had provided them with enough probable cause to obtain warrants for financial records, electronic communications, and physical searches of both the family home and the Clarke Construction offices. The speed at which everything moved was intoxicating after years of feeling powerless. Watching federal agents take my case seriously felt like vindication on a cosmic level. Friday morning, exactly 3 days after that disastrous dinner, I was sitting in my office reviewing a completely unrelated case when my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor across the street from my parents' house. "Oh my God, Madison. There are FBI agents and police cars everywhere at your parents' place. Are they okay?" I calmly replied that I hoped everything was fine while internally doing cartwheels around my office. The raid I'd been anticipating was finally happening. The news coverage started that evening. "Local construction company owner arrested in tax fraud scheme" was the headline on Channel 7's 6 o'clock broadcast, complete with footage of my father being led away in handcuffs while my mother sobbed on their front lawn. The irony wasn't lost on me that the house they were being arrested in front of was purchased with money they'd stolen from the same taxpayers who were now watching them on the evening news. By Saturday, the story had exploded across local media. The newspaper ran a front-page exposé detailing how Clarke Construction had been systematically defrauding government contracts for over a decade, paying workers under the table to avoid payroll taxes, and hiding millions of dollars in FARD, offshore accounts. What made it even more delicious was that several of their wealthy neighbors and country club friends were quoted expressing shock and betrayal at discovering the Clarks weren't the upstanding citizens they'd pretended to be. The charges were extensive and serious: wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, government contract fraud, and conspiracy. Dad was looking at potentially 15 to 20 years in federal prison, while Mom faced 5 to 8 years as an accomplice who had knowingly benefited from the illegal proceeds. Tyler, thankfully for him, wasn't directly involved in the business operations, though he was named as a recipient of proceeds from illegal activities, specifically the money from Grandma's house that should have been mine. The most satisfying detail emerged during the arraignment. The judge set their bail at $2 million each, secured by property. The irony was perfect. They had to use their illegally purchased assets as collateral to get out of jail for the crime of illegally purchasing those assets. They were forced to mortgage their dream home, liquidate their luxury cars, and drain their domestic bank accounts just to avoid sitting in federal detention while awaiting trial. But the legal consequences were just the beginning of their downfall. The construction company immediately lost all government contracts, which represented about 60% of their revenue. Private clients started canceling projects, not wanting to be associated with a criminal enterprise. Their country club membership was revoked. Mom's charity board positions were terminated. Dad's membership in the Chamber of Commerce was suspended. Their carefully constructed social status crumbled overnight. The employee situation was particularly brutal. Many of the workers who had been paid under the table were undocumented immigrants who had trusted my parents to keep them safe from deportation. When the business collapsed, these families lost not only their income but also their sense of security. Several workers came forward to cooperate with federal investigators, providing testimony about how Dad had explicitly told them the under-the-table payments were to help everyone avoid unnecessary paperwork, while actually enriching himself at their expense. Uncle Frank, Dad's business partner and longtime family friend, immediately hired his own attorney and began cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Watching my father's oldest friendship dissolve into mutual accusations and legal maneuvering was oddly therapeutic. These were people who had excluded me, dismissed me, and treated me like I was worthless for my entire adult life, and now they were turning on each other like rats on a sinking ship. The media attention brought unexpected benefits. Several of my colleagues at the forensic accounting firm were genuinely impressed that I'd built such a comprehensive case on my own time. My boss called me into his office on Monday morning, and instead of reprimanding me for potentially creating conflicts of interest, he offered me a promotion to lead investigator and a substantial raise, apparently demonstrating that I could take down a complex financial fraud scheme using only evenings and weekends. Made me extremely valuable to clients who needed similar expertise. Tyler's response was perhaps the most pathetic of all. He called me repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that ranged from anger, "How could you destroy our family like this?" to bargaining, "Maybe we can work something out before this goes to trial," to pathetic begging, "Please, Madison, I'll do anything to fix this." I saved every message for potential evidence but never responded. The golden child who had coasted through life on unearned privilege was finally experiencing consequences, and it was beautiful to witness. The investigation also vindicated my suspicions about Grandma's will. Federal investigators discovered that the will had been changed just weeks before her death when her medical records showed she was heavily medicated and suffering from severe dementia episodes. The attorney who had facilitated the change was a family friend of Dad's who had since been disbarred for unrelated ethical violations. While the criminal case focused on tax fraud, I was building a civil case to recover my rightful inheritance with interest and punitive damages. Most importantly, I finally felt free. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's disapproval or wondering why I could never measure up to their impossible standards. The truth was that their standards were impossible because they were criminals who had built their lifestyle on stolen money. I hadn't failed them, they had failed society, their employees, their community, and most importantly, they had failed me. 6 months later, the trial became the most entertaining courtroom drama our city had seen in decades. I attended every single day, sitting in the gallery watching the people who had tormented me for years try to explain their crimes to a jury of their actual peers, working-class people who paid their taxes honestly and followed the law. The contrast between their desperate attempts at respectability and the mountain of evidence I had helped compile was absolutely delicious. Dad's defense strategy was predictably arrogant and completely ineffective. His lawyer tried to paint him as a simple businessman who had made accounting errors rather than deliberate criminal choices. This argument fell apart spectacularly when prosecutors presented recorded phone calls where Dad explicitly discussed hiding money from the tax people and emails where he joked about Uncle Sam never finding our Caribbean vacation fund. The jury looked physically disgusted when they heard him laughing about stealing money from taxpayers while those same taxpayers struggled to pay their own bills. Mom's defense was even worse. She claimed she was an innocent housewife who didn't understand her husband's business dealings. This might have worked if prosecutors hadn't found her handwritten notes detailing offshore account numbers and her signature on dozens of documents transferring money to shell companies. The final nail in her coffin was security camera footage from the Cayman Islands bank showing her personally accessing their safety deposit box multiple times over several years. The confused housewife act became laughable when faced with evidence of her active participation in money laundering. The prosecution's case was airtight, built on the foundation I had provided, and strengthened by additional evidence the FBI had gathered during their investigation. They proved that my parents had stolen $2.8 million from taxpayers over 15 years, with the money used to fund their luxury lifestyle, while honest businesses lost government contracts because they couldn't compete, with fraudulently low bids. The human impact was devastating. The prosecutor brought in testimony from legitimate contractors who had laid off employees because they couldn't match Clarke Construction's illegal pricing advantages. Tyler's involvement became a subplot that provided its own entertainment. While he wasn't charged criminally, he was named as a defendant in the civil asset forfeiture case because he had received proceeds from criminal activity, namely the $400,000 from selling Grandma's house. Watching my former golden boy brother try to explain to federal attorneys why he deserved to keep money that was rightfully mine was almost as satisfying as seeing our parents in orange jumpsuits. The most dramatic moment came when I was called as a witness for the prosecution. Walking into that courtroom and taking the oath while my parents stared at me with pure hatred was terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. For 30 minutes, I calmly explained my investigation methodology, my professional qualifications, and my family relationship to the defendants. When the defense attorney tried to attack my credibility by suggesting I was motivated by family resentment, I delivered the line I'd been practicing for months, Your Honor. I was motivated by a respect for the law and a duty to protect taxpayers from criminals, regardless of whether those criminals happened to share my DNA. The prosecutor then asked me to explain how I felt about exposing my own family's crimes. I looked directly at Dad and said, I feel proud that I chose justice over family loyalty because real families don't steal from their community and then mock the people they've robbed. Dad's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen a daughter choose righteousness over blood relations, and it was powerful testimony. The verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts for both parents. Dad received 18 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $4, $2 million in restitution and penalties. Mom got 8 years and $1.8 million in financial penalties. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly satisfying, he noted, that their crimes weren't motivated by desperation or necessity, but by greed and a sense of entitlement that allowed them to steal from hard-working taxpayers while living lavishly. The asset forfeiture was equally thorough. Their house was seized and sold with proceeds going toward restitution. Their luxury cars, boats, jewelry, and artwork were all confiscated. Their offshore accounts were frozen and emptied by federal authorities. The business was liquidated with legitimate assets sold to pay back taxes and penalties. Within a year, the people who had called me useless had lost everything they'd owned and owed millions more than they could ever repay. But the sweetest justice came from an unexpected source. During the asset recovery process, investigators discovered that Dad had been systematically stealing from his own business partners and employees for years. Uncle Frank, who had cooperated with prosecutors to reduce his own sentence, provided evidence that Dad had been skimming money from payroll, overcharging clients and pocketing the difference, and even stealing from the employee retirement fund. This led to additional charges and civil lawsuits that ensured Dad would never see freedom again, even with good behavior. Tyler's downfall was more gradual, but equally satisfying. The civil court ordered him to return the $400,000 from Grandma's house, with interest and legal fees, bringing his total obligation to nearly $600,000. Since he had no assets or legitimate income, he was forced into bankruptcy and court-supervised employment where his wages were garnished until the debt was paid. The golden child, who had never worked a real job in his life, was suddenly stocking shelves at a grocery store while living in a studio apartment and riding the bus to work. The community response exceeded my wildest dreams. I was invited to speak at local business groups about fraud prevention, quoted in newspaper articles about corporate responsibility, and even honored by the city council for my civic courage in exposing corruption that had cost taxpayers millions. The same people who had attended my parents' elaborate parties and praised their success now treated me like a hero for bringing them to justice. 2 years later, as I sit in my beautiful new home, purchased with legitimate income from my thriving forensic accounting practice, I can honestly say that destroying my family was the best decision I ever made. The house I bought is actually larger than the one my parents lost, but every square foot was earned through honest work rather than stolen from taxpayers. The irony isn't lost on me that their criminal empire ultimately funded my success, since exposing them launched my career to heights I never could have imagined. My professional life has exceeded every expectation I had during those dark years of family abuse. The Clarke construction case became a showcase for my firm, leading to partnerships with federal agencies and high-profile corporate clients who specifically request my expertise. I've been featured in forensic accounting journals, invited to speak at national conferences, and offered consulting contracts with major corporations who want to prevent internal fraud. The useless daughter has become one of the most respected financial investigators in the region, earning more in a year than my parents stole in 5. The personal vindication has been equally rewarding. Grandma's house, which was ultimately returned to me through the asset recovery process, has been restored to its original Victorian beauty and converted into a small bed and breakfast that I run on weekends. Every guest who stays there hears the story of how justice prevailed and honest work triumphed over criminal greed. The house that was stolen from me through elder abuse has become a symbol of redemption and a source of additional income that I donate to organizations supporting fraud victims. Tyler's transformation has been the most dramatic of anyone involved. After 2 years of court-supervised employment and financial responsibility, he's actually become a decent human being. He works as a construction supervisor for a legitimate company, lives within his means, and has even reached out to apologize for years of enabling our parents' abuse. While I don't consider us close, I respect that he chose accountability over self-pity when his world collapsed. Stephanie, unsurprisingly, disappeared the moment his trust fund evaporated, but he seems happier with his current girlfriend who loves him for his work ethic rather than his family's money. The extended consequences for my parents continue to unfold in satisfying ways. Dad's health has deteriorated significantly in prison, and at 58, he's unlikely to survive his full sentence. Mom has been transferred between facilities multiple times due to conflicts with other inmates who don't appreciate wealthy fraudsters. Their former social circle has completely ostracized them. The country club friends, charity board members, and business associates all act like the Clarks never existed. The social status they valued more than integrity has been permanently destroyed. Perhaps most importantly, I've learned that family isn't defined by blood relations, but by mutual respect, support, and shared values. My chosen family now includes colleagues who appreciate my integrity, friends who celebrate my achievements, and a romantic partner who loves me for exactly who I am, rather than trying to change me into someone else's expectations. The loneliness I felt during years of family rejection has been replaced by genuine relationships built on honesty and trust. The financial impact of my decision continues to provide benefits I never anticipated. The whistleblower reward from the federal government was substantial. The asset recovery gave me resources I'd never expected to have, and my enhanced professional reputation has led to speaking fees and consulting contracts that ensure my financial security for life. I've established a scholarship fund for students studying forensic accounting, hoping to inspire others to choose justice over comfort when facing ethical dilemmas. But beyond the money, the house, the career success, and the social recognition, the greatest reward has been the peace that comes from living authentically. I no longer wonder why I can't measure up to impossible standards or question whether I'm somehow defective for failing to earn my family's approval. I understand now that their disapproval was actually a badge of honor, evidence that I was too honest and decent to participate in their criminal lifestyle. The lesson I want everyone to take from this story is that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are actually the biggest obstacles to our happiness and success. Sometimes justice requires us to choose principles over family loyalty, truth over comfortable lies, and our own integrity over others' expectations. It's not easy, it's not painless, but it's sometimes necessary for our own survival and growth. So here's my question for all of you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you experienced the satisfaction of watching karma catch up with people who hurt you? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. Whether it's standing up to toxic relatives, exposing workplace fraud, or any other situation where justice prevailed over family pressure. Your experiences might help someone else find the courage to make difficult but necessary choices. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let me know it was worth sharing. Subscribe to hear more stories about justice, karma, and what happens when good people finally fight back against those who try to keep them down. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that family dysfunction doesn't have to define their future, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and choosing truth over convenience. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, your integrity is worth more than any relationship that requires you to compromise your values. Sometimes the family that hurts you the most is the family you need to leave behind to find the family that will love you properly. Life's too short to waste on people who can't appreciate your worth whether they share your DNA or not.